Hello. Welcome to the last day of Dreamforce. I'm really happy you all made it out here at 8:45 in the morning. I'm Chris Seymour. I'm an architect on Lightning Platform at Salesforce on the UI Services and UI API team, as my colleague Thomas Cook.
Hi, everybody.
And we're going to talk to you a bit about the user interface API and how you can use it to make awesome mobile apps. There's me. So first, I'm just going to give a brief introduction on what the UI API is. Then I'm going to show a React Native app built with it and a React Web app built with it. Talk a bit about the roadmap, and maybe take some questions if that's possible. You've seen this 1,000 times. Don't take investment advice from me. If I gave good investment advice, I'd be a millionaire. All right. So the user interface API is a new family of APIs at Salesforce. It is about aggregating and putting together all the stuff that you need to make a user-centered application. We pull together data and metadata and layout information, and it's really oriented towards getting you building an app quickly without having to do a lot of busy work and synthesis and boilerplate that you might have to if you're using the lower level, more data-oriented APIs.
And if I may just elaborate that on a little bit, it came into being as part of developing SFX. It's been in the works for a long time. We kind of looked at the Salesforce APIs we had, and they weren't always what we needed. Because dirty little secret, Salesforce doesn't always use their own APIs to build their own UI. They do now, though, and this UI API is the result of that.
Yeah, when we built Lex, we began more of a concerted effort in the company to be building the UI only on our own APIs. So the UI API is the layer that we built on top of our other APIs to power the UI. So now we're trying to not keep that locked away in Salesforce and open it up to our customers. So it's part of a larger roadmap where UI API now provides records and layouts and object info and pick list stuff and the beginning of list stuff through this API. Built on top of that, we have the Lightning Data Service that Thomas works on, which sits in the client and caches all that stuff, and it handles caching like records across the whole page. So do you want to talk a bit more about?
Yeah, it also exposes, so it is the JavaScript manifestation of UI API. UI API is a REST API, and on the JavaScript side of things, we provide bindings to that REST API that you can call in JavaScript, in your Lightning components, in the controllers, get the results, and use them. And this is the emergence of even more powerful platform features, where we've had a component architecture for a while, but we haven't had the best data story, in my opinion. You've had to go back to an Apex controller, run Apex. That makes for chatty apps. There's no caching in the middle of that, so you're going to go back to the server every time you want to run Apex. And it potentially even worse, it leaves it open for multiple components to be looking at the same data but not be in sync with each other, because one component refreshed or updated data and one component didn't. And so at the Lightning Data Service layer, we are caching data that we get through UI API, and we're doing that to make an app both more performant, because you don't have to always go to the server if we have the data on the client, and also we can normalize data behind the scenes and provide cache consistency and therefore view consistency. So you avoid that problem of having multiple components that are looking at different stages of data.
Cool. So yeah, this kind of summarizes a bit what we're saying. The UI API lets you kind of pull together data and metadata in something that's really quick and aggregates what you need to display your records. So right now, as of the winter release, we have all these endpoints available. You can retrieve layout and object stuff. One interesting thing you can do is you can get clone and default values. So if you want to create a new record, we give you the template that's filled in with all your defaults for that record. We also support cloning. And we have some fancier pick list and junction list endpoints. There's also stuff from other teams. There's lists of actions for records and favorites. So in the UI where you have a little star on a record, that API is part of this. So the benefits are we're providing some of the business logic that powers the Lex UI. All the results are localized for the context user. We're built on the same limits as everything else. And this automatically does all the FLS and sharing stuff because it's doing stuff as the context user, what they would see in the UI. Everything that's hidden, that's supposed to be hidden, is hidden.
I'd say in the context of building mobile apps, which we're talking about here, there's one other big advantage that didn't make it onto the slide, and that is you will hopefully need to make fewer API calls. One of our own mobile teams, the field services team, was building a mobile app about a year ago, and we talked to them extensively, and one of their number one complaints was, we have to make tons and tons and tons of API calls. We have to go get metadata, then we have to go get data, then we have to go get more metadata, then we have to get more data. And in the context of a mobile app, that is a lot of going over the wire. That's a lot of using your 3G or 4G network. That's time spent. It makes it imperative that you do good caching, which is tricky code, which is hard work. So in the UI API, as Chris has said, we're providing metadata and data. We often provide it in the same request. So you can get, in UI API, the metadata for, say, 5 different entities. You can request 15 different records, all of different entity types. You can get everything you need back in one shot. And that saves you, in the end, a lot of network traffic.
Yep. So the ideal use case is building your own apps, building your own web pages with your own look and feel. So we're providing you the stuff that you need for the UI, but all the branding and things will be up to you. And places where you want the metadata updates that you make to get reflected, but you don't have to do a lot of work to synthesize them together. The UI API is not really about doing data integrations. We don't advise people to rebuild the entire Salesforce UI. And if you're building Lightning components on platform, it's a better idea to use something like Lightning Data Service and the other things we provide richly on platform. So we have some sample code that's up on GitHub, on the force.com GitHub, and I'm going to go over these apps a bit here. So the first one is based in React Native, so it's an iOS and probably Android client that uses UI API to view records. And there's a Node.js-based one for doing a web page. For the native one in particular, we're using Salesforce OAuth for the login. We're using React Native as the main framework, Redux to separate the state, and this plugin called Sagas, which helps you manage promises. So we're going to switch out to some of that. Oh, that's not the right one. So I'm going to try out the React Native app first. It's pretty easy. You just get it from GitHub, you do an npm install, and then you run it like this. If you have Xcode installed. There we go. Whoa, that's really big. All right. So no, that's not good. All right. So we're using OAuth, so you get the usual little OAuth screen here for your connected app. And we're just using the MRU endpoint to get the recent stuff. And then when we click on a record, that just made a single UI API call that returned all the data that's being rendered here. It returned metadata about the objects and the fields, and it returned the layout. And we passed a form factor small, which tells the server that we want to have the one-dimensional version of it. And this matches exactly what you see in the Salesforce mobile app, formerly Salesforce 1. So if we take a look at the console, I kind of dumped the JSON, but it's a mess. It'll look better in the other app. So there's just one API call to get all the stuff to render the screen.
So there's a couple things to notice here, if I may.
Sure.
What did you guys see when you saw that happen? Did anything stand out? Was it fast? It's pretty fast, right? Another thing I would point out is you see formatted values up here, like the phone number. It's got formatting. The I think there was total
currency.
sales.
Yeah.
Has a currency format. That's all there. That all
Yep.
came down in that payload. So you didn't have to use a format command in a SOQL query. It just showed up. You just asked for it. It's there.
Yep.
So
Because it's all built for user interfaces. And we support doing edits as well, just to be complete. We have some great pick list support that's kind of better than you get in other places. And in the sample app, you can just, bump around and do some edits and save. And this is just going to do a single patch to update the record. There you go. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and show the I'll show you the code a little bit to some extent. So the screen where we saw the record, literally that's powered by just this single URL right here. So we're just doing a get against UI API, record UI, passing in a record ID and form factor small, mode view and edit. And that gave us all the stuff we needed for that screen. And I'll show you more of the payloads in the other app. So the other app is the web app. Oh, it's the wrong screen. Here. So this is our Node.js-based app. And I'm going to show you some features that are coming in the spring release. So there's some new stuff, again, safe harbor and all that. So if I take a look at a record in this app, again, it's the same thing. We made one API call. We rendered it. Take a look at the JSON that powered that. So this is the record UI endpoint. You're getting back layout user state, like which sections are collapsed. You're getting back the layout. You're getting back entity info about this entity and things that are foreign keyed. And you're getting the record data. So the record data is pretty straightforward. You have some fields with some values. The layout just has, per record type, per mode. It has a bunch of sections with all this information in it. And the object info is metadata about the fields and the objects involved. This is all one API call. You'll also notice that we have e-tags now. That's new in the spring release. We're adding e-tags for all of our top-level payloads and top-level payloads that are embedded within those. That means that you'll be able to send us back requests with the e-tags, and if nothing's changed, we return you nothing in a 304, I think, right?
that's correct.
So that means you don't have to throw too much stuff over the wire if nothing's changed.
Yeah, in the context of a mobile app, that's a huge deal because that means you are not sending data over the wire, so your response is quicker. You don't have to spend any mobile processor power parsing that on the client. These are large payloads. This is a lot of information.
Yeah.
You want to avoid parsing that if you can. That'll save battery in the end because you're not cranking the CPU to process all this.
So one thing that is difficult to do sometimes is dealing with pick lists, especially in UI. You don't want to rip apart bit sets and things. Thomas has done all the hard work of pick lists for you once. You never have to do it again because it's in the API. So in the object info that we return for the fields, we indicate the controlling fields. So city is based in state and country in this case. We also have this new thing that's coming in the spring release. If I can find it. In the entity itself, the information, we return something called dependent fields. This is a little tree that reflects the pick list dependency in your entity. So in this case, we set one up where we have country with state and then city underneath. And country also gives you language choices that are filtered. So now if I go ahead and edit this record here, what we do is in this particular app, we're calling a new endpoint, which is the entity record type picklist values endpoint. And that returns us all the picklist values for this entity for a specific record type, so that you don't have to make a ton of different calls to get all these things. And this has information about all the picklist values. So it's very easy between that new metadata and this new picklist values endpoint to build a dependency graph editor. So we had one of the junior members in our team throw this together in a day this week, where you change things. It's really easy to figure out what the filter values are going to be. And it's that easy. And this is just based on that first payload to get the big aggregate, and then the second payload to get the picklist values. That's all you need to call through the UI API to render this.
And we have a similar endpoint for lookups, because lookups are the other thing you're going to want an API to go call and get the appropriate values. Supports type ahead, supports all the features that you have in a lookup in Salesforce.
Yeah, so I think that's what we have for demos. Remember, they're on githubforce.com under record viewer, native, and record viewer. I'm just going to go back to the presentation and finish up. So this is what we were talking about. Coming in spring, we have the e-tag headers. We have a list of supported objects. We have the dependent picklist graph that I showed. And our friends on the lists team have also been building some great new endpoints around lists. So they have an endpoint that will give you all of the metadata to render a list on the screen, a list view. It includes information about the columns and the source of information for it. And calling that endpoint will also give you the first page of records for that list. So it gives you everything you need in one call to render a list view on the screen. And there's also facilities for asking, like, well, I want this list, and I want to show some extra fields. You can just throw some extra fields in the URL, and they'll give it all back to you. So it's really exciting. We're also looking in the future at adding related lists and more search stuff, and hopefully some field set support. It seemed at the presentation yesterday like field sets are pretty popular. And that's all we got. I might be able to answer questions, I suppose, but I don't think we have a mic. So if you have any questions, please come talk to Thomas and I afterwards. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.